We are all a little depraved and debaucherous. Here is the king of podcasts.
Did you think I was going to forget about doing the show even though it's July 4th weekend, the extended July 4th weekend? Did you think I was going to do that? No. Yours for the king of podcasts here with you once again for another program. Thanks for listening in. Appreciating you all checking on the program. Make sure if you haven't done so, please subscribe. Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please rate and review the show. And make sure you have subscribed there. Listen to the commercials in there, the audio. Check it out. And if you're listening on the YouTube channel, youtube.com, and look for @King of Podcasts. Thanks for checking in there as well. So we're going to talk about ghosting. The fact that the younger daters out there are not doing so much. The next generation of ghosting. The evolution of dating's biggest faux pas. This is coming from theface.com that writes about this. And Britt Dawson writes about this and says that she talks about she's been ghosted more times than I can remember, in mid-DM, occasionally after one day, and twice after several months. There's 3 instances that to this day make me cringe so hard I want to scoop my brains out. But she doesn't want to bore us with the details. She just says that, the explanation as to why the men would ever contact her again is that they died. But there's truly nothing worse than sending a string of messages only to be left unread forever. And even though we all know it sucks, ghosting remains part and parcel of modern dating. I mean, it's different for a woman to feel ghosted and to be really offended and feel the time invested was bad. But there's a lot of things that are being talked about where men and women are ghosting each other, and there's just a different way of it. And the younger crowd would prefer to ghost less and just be more honest and say, you know what, I'm not interested, goodbye. And be a little more blunt and upfront about it, which would be fine. It's a little bit crude. It might be a little bit rude and disrespectful to some that might perceive it that way, because on the other side of being ghosted, it's another story. But that's because people don't want to go ahead and be confronted. Remember, because of the wall of dating apps, the wall of DMs, the wall of messages and texts, when you don't have to go ahead and talk to the person face to face and say, hey, I'm not interested in you. Okay. That's a different story. When you have the balls to actually go ahead and confront and decline, that's a different story. And by the way, young ladies, you need to go ahead and get into the habit of declining. And declining vehemently because of the fact that if you don't want to be with somebody that you have talking to you, reject them properly. Because what you want to do is, if they're not coming at you the right way and they're not talking to you to where you feel like you want to talk more with this person and they're honestly, genuinely interested in you, but they're coming at you correctly. That's one thing. If you want to talk to them more, then talk to them more. Don't dilly-dally. Don't just string them along. But if you need to reject them, you want to make sure that for the next girl they approach, they come at it better. So don't tag them along. Don't bring them along. Don't play along with it. Don't friend zone. Let them be known. Listen, if you want someone like me, you have to come at it differently. And you're not going to get me, so go for the next girl. But that's the attitude you should have. 2016, 78% of single millennials had apparently been ghosted at least once. 2019, there was another report that found 25% of U.S. adults have been ghosted. 2020, 85% of respondents had been ghosted. And another survey said ghosting was on a decline during COVID. Well, there's a new Tinder report that we talked about. 32% are less likely to ghost someone than those over the age of 33. We talked about this, remember? One person they quote in this article is, quote, I swear no one wants to commit anymore. They love that weird in-between situationship feeling. They talked to 25-year-old Nyama, who keeps getting ghosted before the first date. Quote, meeting someone from a dating app in person is a real struggle. Often when the date comes around, they go silent and I never hear from them again. Once it happened to me 3 times in 1 week. And Elias, who's 19 years old, who I just quoted, dating etiquette in general tends to be very casual today. That's where no one wants to commit anymore. And so bad behavior is more common. Ghosting is the go-to for any 20-something today to make their feelings known. And that older dates have been more clear and persistent with their feelings, whereas he thinks younger men, especially gay men, favor a lack of communication because we all fear confrontation. Nyan points out that Gen Z tends to be more educated about mental health than millennials, so perhaps their conscience is more involved in the dating style. Knowing the detrimental impact ghosting could have on a person's self-esteem may make them more inclined to explain the reason for ending the conversation. Right. It's people's feelings being hurt. And the reason Gen Z or 20-somethings would be a little more sympathetic towards them is because they feel like they don't want to hurt anybody else's feelings. It's like the golden rule. You don't want to have your feelings hurt. You could relate and sympathize and comprehend why it would hurt somebody else's feelings. So why do that to them? Let them off easy. Let them know what happened. Don't just leave people hanging there. It's not wrong, but it's nice to go and try that. Another person they talked to, Alejandro, 25 years old, quote, I feel like every message I have to send has to be funny, has to move the conversation somewhere, has to stand out. He says that I always feel the need to write a proper message and engage with the points someone has made, ask questions, expand on things. Yeah, you know what happens is, radio guy right here, king of podcasts. I kid you not, when I've gone on a lot of messages with somebody, with a girl, I feel like I have been interviewing them. Now, granted, believe it or not, it's actually worked well for me in my interview style now when I do all my stuff for the other networks that I work on. Cannabis Radio, WMR.FM, my own podcasts, right? I do interviews for my full-time work all the time, regularly. Like tomorrow I have to do interviews. And every Tuesday, Monday and Tuesday, I basically have to do interviews. Sometimes 4 to 6 a week. And you know what happens? I do them, and it is kind of like a conversation, like you're almost like talking to a potential date in some ways, because you might get a little bit personal in the conversation and you want to make sure you're engaged. So for me, it might be a potential lead I'm talking to. So I need to go ahead and stay engaged with them. But that's the part. Remember, this is part of the dating game we've talked about many times before. The dating game is this. See, Alejandro doesn't understand. He's just subconsciously going into the dating game, which is fine. But when you're getting nowhere with it, right? Because people are not placating to the dating game anymore. Remember that. So if they're not doing that, then what happens is that you're afraid of where things go. Like, they talk about this in here. Dating apps contribute to the pressure to write the perfect message. Right. But you don't. The thing is, texting is not the wherewithal to have great conversations. I hate to say that. Alejandro, you just have to understand, you just need to be able to go and communicate as you want, as yourself, and hope that the conversation goes back and forth. Because if it doesn't, you don't need to go ahead and be, the entertainer, the comedian, the lecturer, the informant, the know-it-all to be able to go and keep someone interested. You're just trying too hard. But this is why texting doesn't really stand out, because you really can't get emotions, you can't get feelings, you can't get real interest in somebody. When you're in the right environment and you're drinking and you're having, a good dinner and you're just seeing each other in each other's eyes and the real component. Because here's the part he's saying right now that's very important. Ghosters might be afraid of rejection themselves. Quote, it's almost like I'm scared to continue the conversation because I fear it ending. I can imagine what it could have been without having to actually face any rejection, which is crazy because the person getting ghosted just wants to chat. But as the ghoster, you feel like you maintain control of the conversation and therefore the relationship. But it just feels like a ghoster is trying to excuse his actions. Correct. So the women that might be ghosting you guys are also afraid of being rejected. Everybody's being afraid of rejected. Stop it. I know when you're a teenager or a 20-something, it is kind of tough to go ahead and take rejection and take the loss. Because remember, we have a lot of younger people that are kind of coddled. They're not used to losing. They're not used to striking out. Okay, one of the first girls I talked to in high school, I'm going to tell you this story. If I haven't told this, please tell me if I'm repeating myself. So 14 years old. And there was this cute girl that did come in. I'm sure I've told this story. There was a cute blonde, wavy haired girl named Jennifer. And if it was the year, she was the grade before me. I was in 8th grade. She's in 7th. Well, middle school, right? And I remember my growth spurt. Like, I was always a chubby kid. Always a fat kid. Let's just say it like that. But there was that good 9 months to a year that I grew like 6 inches taller. And so I went from what? 4'5", 4'6" to like 5'1", 5'2". And when I was 150 pounds, 140 pounds, boom, I'm a skinny guy. And I'm like, wow, I look good. I got my hair. I'm wearing glasses. I'm dressing better. Hell, I was dressing in polos. I was dressing in the silk and rayon shirts back in the day. The Z Cavaricis, the Bugle Boys. That was the style we had in the 90s. And then I remember trying to just talk to the girl. And I was like, even though I was going to be awkward, because I didn't know what to say and what to do, I didn't worry about being rejected. I was just thinking, well, I'm the best looking I could possibly be. And if I look good now, I'm going to pick the best girl I could possibly get to maybe go out with and maybe finally learn what it's like to date. And maybe she'll take umbrage to me and maybe she'll be a little bit sympathetic to me and see, look, I'm just trying here. You know what she did? I asked her out. I talked to her in front of her friends. That was smart. And you know what? After that, she didn't give me an answer. But what she did was she slapped me in my face. Because she was offended I actually asked her out. If she would be my girlfriend. She didn't, I don't know, she just took something to that. Slapped the glasses off my face. Okay? That's a real rejection. And that's about as bad a rejection as you get. And I've had other rejections where I've been told to fuck off, or, you're a fat fuck. I got now that kind of stuff, man. Okay, I've gotten the real, like the creepy, you're weird, all the things possible I could have heard from a girl to reject me. I've heard it. And that's fine. But it just gave me a little more intestinal fortitude because that had to happen to me. What am I going to do? So 20-somethings and out there, the teens, you have to realize you're only going to get better by taking the lumps. Taking the loss. It's like, honestly, you're like playing blackjack. You're gambling on a chance to date somebody. Now, here's the other part they talk about here. Nyam also says, many people still think wasting your time without explanation is acceptable. As long as you're texting, there is no real vested interest. Okay? For a fact. I can tell you that from all the girls I've ever texted, if I had to give a percentage of how many would actually get on the phone with me and talk, about 20%. 20% of the ones I talked to. And that's if it's somebody I already met before and I got their number. But if I'm talking about on a dating app, that goes down to 10%. And maybe less than that. Now, meeting, it might have been a little bit higher when I was younger. Say, mid-90s into the 2010s, okay? But seriously? Another 10 to 20% turnaround if I was able to meet a girl in person that I met online. Very rare. Very rare. Now, the other thing, too, is that, okay, younger folks are always worried about the 20-somethings and the teens. They're also worried about the fact that, they're still living at home with their parents at 18 to 25 years old. They're not able to afford live alone or in shared housing in bigger cities. Many of them might still live in big cities, but if they move back to their hometowns, it may simply be harder to go somewhere. In smaller places, people don't really have the luxury to go someone if they will likely see them around. Yep. Some stats also suggest that Gen Z is using dating apps less, preferring to meet people organically. And it's hard to pretend you don't exist when you're ghosting friends of friends, colleagues, or people who run in the same circles as you. You can't hide in the toilets forever. Right. So, that's what's going on here. It's kind of sucks. It's not great about this. So there's one trend that's going on. And Oceana Tepfenhart writes for yourtango.com and writes about, I used to confront people who ghosted me. Here's why I stopped. And this is some good advice here. For some people, it's embarrassing, send the message you're not worth a reply, actively sparking PTSD-like symptoms in people who have done it to them. What she didn't realize, the ghosting happening that this writer explains is fear for their safety or worried to be pulled back into abuse. If you did something that deeply offended them. They want to politely decline your friendship or end it, but don't know how to do it respectfully. They see something wrong with you that you don't. Or if those relationships that turns toxic, or if you have nothing in common and they actually want to hurt you. These are some of the things that are going on, and you realize that. Or they did something to ruin a relationship without knowing you had serious mental health issues. Well, when a person ghosts, they've proven that they are not going to be there for you. There have been cases where fiancés ghosted their partners at the altar, married, then ghosted them again, serving them the divorce papers. If you want reliability, a ghoster will never give this to you. Remember, movie The Bronx Tale, right? And Chaz Palminteri's character, Sonny, talks to Colangelo, or C. I forget the actor's name. When the guy's trying to follow one guy on the street that owes him $20. Well, Chaz Palminteri's character says, listen, you're worried about this guy over $20. Well, consider it money that you just paid to get rid of him. That's a good way of thinking about it. The same thing here. If you're being ghosted, the person's doing you a favor. Don't be offended by it. Just let it be. Don't even worry about it at all. It's more important to feel that way. So there's a new phrase now in dating. It's not love bombing, which we know is associated with narcissistic manipulative behavior, where these a lot of long messages and a lot of complimentary, a lot of that making a woman or a man, or making a woman really feel so beautiful, so loved, so appreciated, so accepted, right? Flirty comments, lengthy texts. If you've been talking to somebody for several weeks and then you went on one or two dates, maybe you haven't gone on any yet. It's not always a love bomber who engages in the actions. And often the person doesn't have nefarious intentions. The behavior can be unconscious and come from a relatable place of wanting love, connection, and safety. The person might have an anxious attachment profile and wants the security and validation of whichever new person they're talking to before really knowing if they really fully like them yet. Author and coach Renee Wade says that an anxious attachment style can cause you to attach prematurely. And the attachment isn't to the person you really are, but to the idea of who you might be. I've talked about this story about the Attached book that I talked about was an audio book. And now there's a thing that they talk about where it's not just love bombing, but it's called love dusting. And it's where you're really doing it where it's very subconscious. You're not doing it to do anything. You're not doing it where it's trying to be for the purpose of doing something really bad. That you're trying to get them into a controlling, toxic relationship. Don't look at it that way. But that is something that's probably happened. And it's not healthy, but we all going to get that. We get a fantasy production of one because none of the experiences have been shared. Right. When you're doing texting and you're doing even, FaceTime, you are going to be enveloped in the fantasy of what you are perceiving the person you're talking to is, instead of actually meeting the person in real life and seeing who they really are. Because of how text messaging and direct messaging now, DMs, it's becoming more and more of that now, because we're looking at the pictures on social media. We're looking at the pictures on dating apps, the best possible pictures, the best possible perception of a person. And you know what? You're going to be set for a letdown, which is why in the dating game, we have to realize we are in fantasy. We are trying to live up to some expectations for the significant other. But then you got to realize we're all going to have to go to the realization we're all going to have to get ourselves back down to reality and realize it's not the same way. This is very true. One more story before we wrap things up. See, I was able to get a show in tonight. Aren't you happy for me? Aren't you happy I got the show in? What men need to do to stop doing on first dates. BuzzFeed put the story out. A couple of things they said, they give some scenarios. You've gone on once too many dates with men. They insist on ordering for you. They didn't give you many suggestions. They just fully cut you off when the server came to take your order and order for you. If a date instantly ruined it for you when a guy asks if he can come home with you or if you can go home with him in the middle of the conversation, making the whole evening feel transactional. Guys shouldn't do that. If you're sick of going on first dates with men where they bring their ex up for no reason in the middle of their conversation, it's worse when they call their ex crazy or start trash talking them. And so there's all these things he talked about that you need to consider. If you're going on a first date, don't do. Oh, there you go. Gave you your episode tonight. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you appreciate that I took the time out of the holiday schedule to make sure I got this in. And I'm glad I did. And by the way, thank you so much all for checking my episode last week about No Hard Feelings. If you haven't had a chance to watch the movie, please do. And please tell me what you think about it. And of course, if you want to reach out to me at any time, comment on the program. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. I really would appreciate that. And I will go ahead and take back comments on the previous episode, and I will bring them back up on the program. I'll be happy to do that. So I hope you'll consider that. And please pass the word on to Pray the Debaucherous. Let people know out there to go and do that. So remember, as we go into the episode, as we go into next week, just a quick reminder. When you're going to go back out there and you're trying to meet somebody, you're sliding in the DMs, and you're trying to go ahead and get together and hopefully make something out of the relationship where you don't have the fantasy projection. You're not going to put these expectations up of who you think you're with and who they're going to be. Instead, what you're doing is you're finding out who they really are. And you're finding out when you meet them in person, you might like them and you might enjoy their company. And they might be wonderful people. And the fantasy projection might just match what the reality really is. And maybe you'll like each other regardless of all that texting back and forth. Cut the texting, cut the DMs, meet in person. And maybe you'll get together and hook up. And maybe both of you will get a little depraved and debaucherous.